Ever brought a dish to share that was made from nothing but leftovers, lard, and luck? During the Great Depression, potlucks weren't just parties. They were survival disguised as supper. These forgotten recipes weren't fancy, but they fed entire neighborhoods. And yes, you need to try them. When you're tasked with feeding hungry neighbors during a time when meat was scarce and fresh ingredients were luxuries, creativity was the secret sauce to making a meal memorable. In stepped the tomato aspic salad, a quirky gelatin mold born from pantry staples, which became surprisingly popular at Depression-era potlucks. Home cooks combined tangy tomato juice, often canned or preserved, with economical vegetables like celery, onions, and peppers suspended delicately in gelatin. Since traditional proteins were hard to come by, gelatin provided a sneaky nutritional boost while adding a dash of visual intrigue to the communal table. Housewives cleverly substituted fresh tomatoes with inexpensive canned juice, highlighting how inventive substitutions turned limited pantry stocks into satisfying dishes. This odd yet charming dish embodied the Great Depression's resourcefulness. Each bite was a testament to culinary innovation under pressure. While today gelatin salads might get side eyes at gatherings, in the 1930s presenting a wobbly tomato-flavored mold was both practical and fashionable, an affordable luxury amidst hardship. In an era when your grocery list often looked more like a wish list, home cooks discovered clever ways to elevate pantry staples into potluck stars. One such creation was the hominy and tomato bake, an ingenious casserole that turned humble canned hominy into an inviting, family-friendly dish. Hominy, essentially corn kernels soaked in an alkali solution, had long been an inexpensive source of nourishment. Paired with canned tomatoes, it provided vital nutrition while remaining affordable. Thrifty cooks layered these ingredients generously with seasoned breadcrumbs, a smart trick to stretch portions, providing texture and bulk without straining the budget. To replace the pricier cheese, homemakers often enhance this casserole's flavor using homegrown herbs or leftover bacon drippings, showcasing a Depression-era knack for turning scarcity into flavor. Interestingly, hominy wasn't just affordable. It was versatile, appearing regularly in soups, stews, and even desserts during tough economic times. Although some modern palates might consider canned hominy a relic, the casserole's rustic charm and cozy, nostalgic flavor kept it popular well beyond the 1930s, appearing in community cookbooks into the mid-century. When meats and finer vegetables vanished from many kitchen tables during the Depression, resourceful cooks reached for something far humbler: the trusty turnip. Often overlooked today, turnips became an affordable culinary hero back then, especially in dishes like creamed turnips on biscuits, a comfort food innovation born from sheer necessity. Turnips were sliced, simmered until tender, and gently folded into a creamy sauce, a clever trick to stretch a few spoonfuls of milk or butter across multiple servings. If dairy was scarce, cooks ingeniously substituted bacon grease or broth, giving this humble root vegetable a savory boost without breaking the bank. Spooned generously over biscuits, often homemade from inexpensive flour and baking soda, this dish was a hearty solution when pantries looked depressingly bare. Surprisingly, turnips weren't merely filler food. They offered crucial vitamins like C and fiber, essential nutrients when fresh produce options were limited. Turnips also stored remarkably well, becoming a pantry staple in homes nationwide, meaning even families without gardens had dependable access to fresh vegetables throughout winter. Families in the Depression had a love-hate relationship with beans. They might have groaned at their constant appearance, but couldn't deny the beans' wallet-friendly virtues. Out of necessity, home cooks creatively reimagined this humble legume, crafting hearty dishes like the bean loaf with tomato sauce, a meatloaf look-alike minus the meat. Instead of pricey ground beef, mashed beans took center stage, mixed cleverly with breadcrumbs, onions, and seasonings to mimic texture and flavor. Tomato sauce, generously spooned over top, was often homemade from canned tomatoes, stretching ingredients even further and adding essential moisture and richness. Interestingly, dried beans were so affordable and nutrient-rich that Depression-era government agencies promoted them heavily, distributing free recipe books highlighting dishes like bean loaves to help struggling families. Clever substitutions were key. Eggs, used to bind traditional loaves, were replaced by soaked breadcrumbs or oatmeal, a clever trick still useful today. Although bean loaf might not inspire enthusiastic applause at contemporary potlucks in the 1930s, it symbolized ingenuity and resilience, proving beans could become delicious comfort food, even if reluctantly embraced. Canned foods were lifesavers during the Depression, transforming pantries into treasure troves of culinary creativity. Enter Depression-era salmon pea wiggle, a whimsically named dish that brought some much-needed amusement and nutrition to potluck gatherings of the 1930s. At first glance, the unusual combination of canned salmon, peas, and white sauce spooned over crunchy crackers might raise eyebrows today. Yet back then, it represented clever homemaking at its best. Fresh fish was often prohibitively expensive, so budget-savvy cooks leaned on canned salmon, easily accessible and surprisingly nutritious, providing protein and omega-3s without emptying the purse. Similarly, fresh produce shortages led resourceful households to canned peas, giving the dish color and sweetness at minimal cost. The creamy white sauce was typically fashioned from pantry staples. Milk stretched thinly with flour or, in leaner times, water mixed with bacon grease as a tasty substitution. The quirky name wiggle likely came from the slightly jiggly texture of the white sauce, a playful touch, injecting a bit of fun into challenging circumstances. No Depression-era cook worth their salt would let good pickle brine go to waste, especially when flavoring was scarce and budgets tighter than the pickle jar lid. Thus, from humble kitchens emerged pickle soup, a tangy, resourceful dish blending leftover pickle juice, humble root vegetables like potatoes and carrots, and whatever pantry scraps happened to be available. Often thickened slightly with flour or potato starch, cooks could make this broth-based soup surprisingly filling without spending extra pennies. During an era when vinegar and spices were costly luxuries, leftover pickle juice became culinary gold, supplying robust flavor without extra expense. Clever substitutions like garden herbs or diced pickles replaced pricier seasonings, demonstrating Depression cooks' incredible ingenuity. Though today's diners might initially cringe at sipping pickle-flavored broth, the soup had a devoted following in communities with Eastern European heritage, where dill pickles reigned supreme and sour flavors were embraced wholeheartedly. Its tart profile even served as a comforting, affordable winter staple, beloved for its warmth and nutrient-rich ingredients like vitamin-filled veggies that prevented scurvy during harsh times. Fried treats weren't exactly commonplace during the Great Depression, but creative home cooks found clever ways to stretch pantry staples into delicious finger foods worth sharing. Sauerkraut balls emerged from immigrant communities, transforming humble sauerkraut, preserved, vitamin-rich, and affordable, into crispy, golden appetizers that vanished quickly at potlucks. Made from drained sauerkraut mixed generously with breadcrumbs, sometimes bound with mashed potatoes when eggs were scarce, these tangy bites showcased true culinary ingenuity. With meat being rare and expensive, cooks added flavor by sautéing onions or garlic, cleverly creating an irresistible aroma without extra cost. Sauerkraut itself, fermented cabbage rich in vitamin C, was both economical and beneficial, often a life-saving source of nutrients in winter months. Frying these tangy morsels in inexpensive rendered fats like lard or bacon grease created a crunchy exterior irresistible enough to tempt even skeptical eaters. Interestingly, though sauerkraut balls originated from Central European cooking traditions, their Depression-era popularity quickly spread beyond cultural boundaries, proving that tasty comfort foods transcend economic conditions. During the Great Depression, vegetables like carrots and potatoes were kitchen VIPs, not because of glamour, but sheer affordability and availability. The humble yet flavorful carrot and potato bake, a casserole of thinly sliced potatoes combined with brightly grated carrots, became a potluck favorite precisely because it cleverly stretched ingredients without sacrificing nutrition or taste. To keep budgets intact, thrifty cooks relied on simple additions like flour, thickened milk, or leftover broth instead of costly cream, and seasoned it sparingly with homegrown herbs or scraps of onion, turning basic veggies into something delightfully savory. Interestingly, carrots, high in vitamin A, gained popularity during tough economic times, not only because they were cheap, But they also boosted nutrition at a time when balanced diets seemed harder than balancing checkbooks. Potato slices baked tenderly alongside carrots delivered comforting carbs and vital nutrients, creating an unexpectedly hearty dish without meat or expensive dairy. Families attending potluck gatherings eagerly welcomed casseroles like this, a nutritious yet inexpensive way to ensure everyone left the dinner full, even if wallets stayed empty. Biscuits have long been staples at American dinner tables, but during the Great Depression, traditional wheat flour biscuits became luxuries families could rarely afford. Ingeniously, home cooks turned to cornmeal, cheap, filling, and abundantly available, to bake cornmeal biscuits with syrup, a comforting alternative that kept everyone satisfied. Cornmeal, originally a Native American staple, gained renewed popularity in the Depression, not only because it was economical, but also due to its nutritional value, providing essential fiber and vitamins at a fraction of the cost. With sugar scarce and expensive, resourceful cooks substituted molasses or homemade syrups to sweeten these biscuits, imparting a delightful caramelized flavor that elevated a simple meal into something special. Bakers cleverly blended modest amounts of wheat flour with cornmeal to keep texture tender without breaking tight budgets. Surprisingly, syrup-sweetened cornmeal biscuits became not only a side dish but also an occasional dessert, proving that versatility was indeed a Depression-era virtue. In a time when grocery store shelves were emptier than politicians' promises, Depression-era families turned to their own backyards for survival, harvesting wild greens often overlooked today. One ingenious example was dandelion green fritters, a crispy, fried dish crafted from abundant and nutritious weeds that popped up freely, much to homeowners' annoyance, but cooks' delight. Surprisingly nutritious, dandelion greens are rich in vitamins A and K, providing crucial dietary benefits when fresh vegetables were luxuries. Resourceful cooks mixed these tangy wild greens into a simple batter made from flour, water, and sometimes a splash of milk or bacon grease, whatever pantry staples they could spare, then fried spoonfuls to golden perfection, transforming bitter weeds into delectable comfort food. Ingeniously, these fritters provided an economical alternative to expensive vegetables, showcasing Depression-era creativity by literally turning backyard nuisances into dinner-table delicacies. Originally inspired by European foraging traditions, dandelions found their niche in American kitchens during economic hardship, becoming tasty proof that necessity was the mother of delicious invention. In the 1930s, even a simple vegetable like celery became the unlikely hero of Depression-era meals. Creamed celery over toast, a humble yet surprisingly popular dish, epitomized how clever cooks transformed economical ingredients into filling comfort food. Celery, inexpensive and versatile, was gently simmered in a basic white sauce, usually crafted from pantry staples like flour, milk, or even broth when dairy was scarce. Creative homemakers sometimes stretched this sauce further with leftover bacon grease or diluted evaporated milk, showcasing remarkable ingenuity when luxury ingredients were distant memories. Poured generously over toasted stale bread, a strategic use of otherwise wasted leftovers, this creamy concoction ensured families stayed full, even if wallets remained empty. Interestingly, celery wasn't merely affordable. It provided valuable vitamins and dietary fiber, critical when balanced nutrition seemed like an impossible goal. Although today celery rarely stars in main dishes, Depression-era potluck tables proudly featured it front and center, proving even the humblest veggies could achieve culinary fame. Back in the Depression, tossing apple peels in the trash was practically unthinkable. Those scraps were culinary gold for resourceful cooks, who transformed them into apple peel jelly, a clever, sweet treat that stretched household budgets further than a politician's promises. Homemakers combined leftover peels, cores, and even bruised apple bits with water, boiling them into a flavorful liquid before adding sugar and simmering the mixture until it thickened naturally, often without expensive store-bought pectin. Ingeniously, cooks sometimes enhanced this homemade jelly with lemon juice or vinegar as affordable substitutes to mimic pricey commercial preservatives, ensuring it remained fresh and bright-tasting. Apple peels contain natural pectin. Who knew leftovers had built-in magic? So the jelly set beautifully without extra costs. historically significant beyond simple economy. Preserving fruits through homemade jellies allowed families to enjoy essential vitamins and sweetness long after harvest seasons ended. During Depression-era potlucks, bringing jars of this delicate rosy-hued jelly symbolized not poverty, but creativity and pride, turning frugal kitchens into tiny workshops of culinary art. When family budgets tightened dramatically during the Depression, barley, once considered animal feed, stepped onto American dinner tables as an affordable, nourishing staple. The barley and tomato casserole, a hearty yet humble dish, combined economical barley grains with tangy tomatoes, creating a filling meal out of ingredients previously overlooked or underrated. Home cooks showcased remarkable resourcefulness by swapping out expensive meats with barley's chewy, filling texture, enhanced by canned or fresh garden tomatoes simmered into flavorful sauces. Interestingly, barley wasn't just cheap. It provided valuable dietary fiber and nutrients, making it a healthier option in tough times. If tomatoes ran short, resourceful cooks substituted home-canned tomato juice or even diluted ketchup, highlighting creativity under pressure. Though admittedly, the ketchup option probably raised some skeptical eyebrows at potluck dinners. While barley may not have won culinary glamour points, it earned respect as a sturdy and reliable pantry staple, helping households avoid hunger when pricier grains were beyond reach. This casserole's presence at community gatherings represented more than just sustenance. It symbolized the era's determination to stretch ingredients creatively without sacrificing nourishment or taste. During an era when sweet treats were rare, Depression-era cooks mastered the art of stretching pantry leftovers into indulgences like potato donuts. Ingeniously crafted from leftover mashed potatoes, yes, potatoes, these fluffy confections surprised skeptics by becoming a genuine potluck hit. Housewives creatively substituted pricey ingredients such as eggs or butter with potatoes, which provided moisture and tenderness, making the donuts delightfully soft without overspending. After all, potatoes weren't just filling, they were incredibly economical, versatile, and available year-round. Cooks cleverly spiced the dough with cinnamon, nutmeg, or vanilla when available, then deep-fried batches in whatever cooking fat was handy, usually lard or bacon grease, giving these treats irresistible crisp edges. Historically, potato-based baked goods were common in European communities long before the Depression, but American households rediscovered them out of necessity, turning leftover dinner sides into sugary morning miracles. In Depression-era kitchens, leftovers were sacred, and day-old rice was far too precious to toss away. Resourceful cooks repurposed these humble grains into rice croquettes, crispy fried bites that cleverly combined thriftiness with satisfying flavor. Typically prepared by binding leftover cooked rice with breadcrumbs, a beaten egg, or, in leaner times, a flour and water paste, these golden brown croquettes showcased genuine culinary creativity. If pantry stocks allowed, cooks might incorporate finely diced onions, garden herbs, or even bits of leftover ham or chicken to stretch the flavor further without spending extra. For added texture, stale bread crusts ground into crumbs often replaced costly store-bought breadcrumbs, an ingenious swap proving that empty pockets inspired surprisingly tasty innovations. Though croquettes originally hail from European cuisine, Depression-era American households enthusiastically embraced them, transforming simple leftovers into appetizers fancy enough for any potluck table. Interestingly, croquettes were practical as well as tasty. Frying provided a longer shelf life, essential in times when refrigeration wasn't guaranteed. When times were lean during the Great Depression, cooks knew throwing out perfectly edible beet greens was nearly as scandalous as wasting money. Resourcefully, they crafted dishes like beet greens and potato stir-fry, a wholesome skillet meal that paired hearty potatoes with vibrant, nutritious beet tops, usually dismissed as garden scraps. Economical, tasty, and vitamin-rich, beet greens provided essential nutrients like iron and potassium, making them a vital dietary addition when produce was limited. Clever cooks sautéed chopped beet tops in a skillet alongside sliced potatoes, often using bacon fat or lard as flavorful substitutes for costly butter or oils. Interestingly, beet greens were traditionally popular among immigrant communities, particularly Eastern European and Italian households, who'd long understood the value of using every vegetable part. American families quickly caught on, learning that what once seemed merely compost-bound could become a hearty supper. Potatoes offered bulk and calories, complementing the delicate bitterness of greens without stretching tight grocery budgets. This dish exemplified Depression-era ingenuity, transforming humble ingredients into a flavorful medley suitable for communal gatherings or family meals. In the harsh economic climate of the Great Depression, ingenuity was an ingredient found in every kitchen cabinet. Home cooks frequently turned to affordable, nutrient-rich foods like sweet potatoes, not just as a side dish, but as the star ingredient in sweet potato biscuits, deliciously fluffy biscuits that added warmth to potluck gatherings. Sweet potatoes were a particularly valuable choice due to their low cost, abundance, and exceptional nutritional benefits, offering substantial amounts of fiber and vitamin A, critical in a time when balanced diets were challenging. Resourceful cooks cleverly substituted scarce ingredients like butter or eggs with leftover mashed sweet potatoes, which naturally provided moisture, sweetness, and a pleasing golden hue. If sugar was scarce, molasses or sorghum syrup stepped in to sweeten the dough, delivering subtle depth without hurting household budgets. Interestingly, sweet potato biscuits actually had roots in Southern cooking traditions long before the Depression, but they earned nationwide appreciation as families sought satisfying, nutritious, and economical foods. During the Depression, cabbage was more than just an economical vegetable. It became a culinary hero, often starring in resourceful dishes inspired by immigrant traditions. One standout was stuffed cabbage rolls with rice, where humble cabbage leaves transformed into edible parcels generously filled with seasoned rice. Back then, meat was as rare as a smile from the local banker, so creative cooks cleverly substituted inexpensive grains like rice, sometimes stretching them further with breadcrumbs or finely chopped vegetables to boost flavor and texture without increasing cost. Immigrant communities, particularly those from Eastern Europe, popularized cabbage rolls, often known as halupki or golumpki, turning budget-friendly staples into nourishing dishes that traveled far beyond cultural boundaries. Simmered slowly in a rich tomato broth, usually made from canned tomatoes or tomato paste diluted with water, these cabbage rolls offered comforting warmth during tough times. Surprisingly nutritious, cabbage provided vital vitamins like C and K, essential for keeping families healthy when balanced meals were scarce. While cabbage rolls may seem old-fashioned now, in Depression-era potlucks, their arrival sparked enthusiasm and genuine gratitude. Fruit pies were rare treats during the Great Depression, especially when fresh fruits cost more than a full tank of gas, or at least felt that way. Clever cooks quickly realized raisins, affordable dried grapes readily available at general stores, could be transformed into something deliciously satisfying: raisin pie. To create this Depression-era staple, households combined raisins with simple ingredients like sugar, water, flour, and a dash of cinnamon or vinegar, forming a sweet, jammy filling inside a humble pastry crust. Vinegar, though seemingly odd, provided a clever citrus-like tartness without spending extra pennies on fresh lemons. Interestingly, raisin pies weren't an entirely new idea. They originated as early as pioneer days when fresh produce was scarce, but they made a significant comeback when Depression cooks needed inexpensive comfort food. Raisins provided essential iron and fiber, making this pie more than just dessert. It was an economical, nutritious indulgence. Frugal homemakers even substituted lard or bacon fat for butter in crusts, proving once again that ingenuity made pie crusts flaky even when budgets crumbled. With fresh fruits largely beyond budget during the Depression, resourceful cooks turned to backyard staples like rhubarb, tart stalks that magically grew despite economic downturns. Cleverly combining this hardy plant with stale bread, households created stewed rhubarb and bread, a comforting pudding-like dessert that tasted anything but desperate. Bread, often days old, since waste was practically criminal, was torn into pieces and soaked generously with stewed rhubarb, softened into a sweet, tangy syrup. Rhubarb required minimal sugar, and when sweeteners were scarce, Frugal homemakers substituted sorghum syrup or molasses, adding depth without extra expense. Interestingly, rhubarb wasn't only cheap, it packed beneficial vitamins, including vitamin C, crucial during a time when diets were lacking variety. This inventive dish blended European bread pudding traditions with practical American thriftiness, showcasing the culinary resourcefulness Depression-era families possessed. Even without eggs, cream, or other fancy ingredients, stewed rhubarb elevated humble stale bread into a potluck-worthy dessert, often drawing appreciative nods from neighbors who'd never imagined leftovers could taste so inviting. Potato salad has long held a spot at American potluck tables. But during the Great Depression, cooks faced a tricky challenge: how to feed a crowd when potatoes themselves felt like a luxury. Enter the clever dish known as green bean and potato salad, a warm, tangy recipe that stretched humble potatoes further by generously blending them with affordable, homegrown green beans. Fresh beans from backyard gardens or economical canned varieties were combined with boiled potatoes, then tossed lightly in a vinegar-based dressing. Since mayonnaise was costly and scarce, cooks resourcefully substituted vinegar or leftover pickle brine, imparting a satisfying tang without busting tight budgets. Interestingly, vinegar didn't just save money, it also helped salads last longer without refrigeration, essential during hot summer potlucks. Nutrition-wise, green beans offered vital vitamins and fiber, adding important nutrients while cleverly bulking up the dish. Cooks sometimes jazzed it up by adding bits of onion, garden herbs, or even crispy bacon drippings, if they had a particularly lucky day. The creativity behind this dish highlighted Depression-era ingenuity, transforming pantry staples into something truly delicious. During the Depression, wasting leftover rice was practically unheard of, especially when clever cooks discovered recipes like baked rice and tomato cups, transforming day-old grains into surprisingly elegant dishes. Combining leftover cooked rice with tomatoes, either canned or fresh from modest backyard gardens, home cooks spooned the simple mixture into muffin tins, creating neat portions that looked fancy but cost pennies. If tomatoes were scarce, resourceful cooks ingeniously substituted diluted ketchup or tomato juice, achieving tangy flavor without dipping into precious savings. Adding flavor meant getting creative. A dash of homegrown herbs, a sprinkle of onion scraps, or even leftover bacon bits boosted taste without busting budgets. Muffin tins themselves were brilliant Depression-era tools, allowing portion control and stretching ingredients further. No second helpings unless you wanted to brave disapproving glares. Interestingly, this recipe combined American thriftiness with European techniques, echoing old-world dishes of baked rice layered with simple sauces. Tomato-rich dishes provided valuable nutrients like vitamin C at a time when balanced meals were challenging. In an era when stretching one potato into dinner for 6 felt like culinary magic, resourceful cooks turned to simple yet satisfying dishes like savory potato pancakes. Rooted deeply in European cooking traditions, these crispy, golden brown pancakes became Depression-era favorites across America due to their affordable ingredients and filling nature. Made from grated potatoes mixed with bits of onion and garden-fresh herbs, typically parsley or chives, these pancakes packed serious flavor into every bite without taxing tight grocery budgets. Clever substitutions often came into play, as flour or leftover breadcrumbs replaced costly eggs, binding the pancakes neatly and ensuring crisp edges in the pan. Potatoes, rich in potassium and fiber, provided critical nutrition during difficult times, keeping families full and nourished when more elaborate dishes were unaffordable. While today potato pancakes might seem like quaint festival food, back then they appeared proudly at potlucks and community gatherings, signaling frugal ingenuity rather than poverty. Cooking fats varied widely. Bacon drippings, lard, or even leftover meat grease were all fair game. After all, wasting cooking fat during the Depression was practically considered a federal offense. Long before boxed mixes filled supermarket shelves, Depression-era kitchens relied on a few dependable ingredients to bake comfort into every meal. One such staple was buttermilk cornbread with syrup, a beloved dish that balanced sweet and savory using budget-friendly components found in nearly every rural pantry. Cornmeal, cheap, shelf-stable, and filling, formed the foundation, while buttermilk, often homemade by letting milk sour naturally, provided moisture and tang without needing expensive cream or fresh milk. Sweeteners like cane sugar were a luxury for many families, so cooks reached for molasses, sorghum, or homemade syrup to deliver just enough sweetness to make this cornbread feel like a treat, even if dinner was mostly leftovers. Served warm, it was often enjoyed as both side dish and dessert. Yes, a two-for-one deal, Depression style. Historically, this recipe echoed deep Southern and Appalachian foodways, where resourcefulness was baked into every bite. Some added a touch of lard or bacon drippings for richness, while others relied on nothing more than the heat of the oven and the hope of a full stomach. In households where dessert was more wishful thinking than reality, home bakers found small ways to add joy to the everyday. One such creation was Depression-era cocoa bread, a modest loaf of homemade bread flavored with inexpensive cocoa powder to deliver a subtle hint of chocolate without the extravagance of actual chocolate bars. Cocoa powder, while still a luxury for some, could be stretched sparingly through dough to provide color, aroma, and just enough sweetness to convince the kids they were eating something special. Most versions relied on the basics: flour, yeast or baking soda, a pinch of salt, and water or soured milk. Sugar was added in small amounts if available, but many used molasses or corn syrup as thrifty sweeteners. Fat came from lard or bacon grease, yes, even in sweet bread, because butter was often reserved for birthdays, weddings, and miracles. This cocoa-infused loaf wasn't dessert in the traditional sense, but served with a smear of jam or a drizzle of syrup, it brought comfort to otherwise lean tables. Poor people would have very limited options for food back then. While you might think that since there weren't any taxes, jobs, or grocery store price bumps to worry about, that doesn't necessarily mean it was easier. They had to rely on whatever they could forage, whatever they could grow, and whatever was easiest to buy. Oat gruel was a dish that basically became synonymous with being down on your luck because of this. Oats have, for centuries, been the silver lining in a deeply hungry and bad situation for a lot of people. But that was especially true during medieval times. Oat gruel is pretty much prison food, too. Ever see those shows where the guy gets a porridge-looking slope of food? That's pretty much it. While it was nutritious and it had protein, the biggest reason people ate it was because of the amounts of fiber present in it. It would keep them full for much longer in the day and lead to less hunger pangs, but it also meant that they were continuously losing body fat without being able to make too much muscle. This one is an oddball. Banana and mayonnaise sandwiches were apparently all the rage back then. It was really surprising how common they had become, because usually you would give something like this a bad look and keep moving on with your day, waiting for, the chance to get an actual meal. It's definitely something no one could imagine eating in today's world. This sweet and savory combination actually had die-hard fans, though. Whether it was the fact that this was a convenient sandwich you could throw together in seconds, or how filling and high-calorie it was, people loved it. I mean, being honest with you, I've seen some pretty bizarre banana combinations over the course of preparing this video, but this one definitely stuck in my memory for a little bit. But hey, who can argue with health? And as far as that was concerned, this was a jackpot. Bananas were a natural source of energy and sugar, and mayonnaise was something that really made the dish more filling. This was also particularly popular in the South, and I know you're thinking that's really out of place, and I'd be inclined to agree with you, but the South has definitely been an experimentative place with its food. You could even get this at diners for the right price. Curried sardine salad sandwiches blend the robust, pungent flavors of sardines with the exotic, spicy warmth of curry powder, producing a sandwich that's anything but ordinary. These culinary delights originated in mid-20th century America, when canned sardines were an economical choice in the pantry, especially in the aftermath of World War II. This particular recipe mixes mashed sardines with curry powder, creamy mayonnaise, a splash of lemon juice, and crisp chopped celery, creating a spread that's rich in both flavor and texture. Spread generously on bread, this salad can be adorned with fresh lettuce or cucumber slices, adding a crunch that contrasts beautifully with the creamy filling. In England, it's common to find variations including chopped apples or raisins, adding a sweet note, while American adaptations might toss in hard-boiled eggs or capers, enhancing the flavor profile further. Bacon cheddar potato skins epitomize the fusion of simple ingredients into a beloved American bar snack. This dish, which emerged prominently in the culinary scene during the 1970s, utilizes russet potatoes known for their thick skin and starchy content, making them ideal for baking and frying. The preparation involves halving the potatoes and scooping out most of the flesh, leaving about a quarter-inch attached to the skin. The hollowed-out skins are then baked or deep-fried until crisp and golden. Once crisped, these skins are stuffed with generous amounts of sharp cheddar cheese and crisp, crumbled bacon. The cheddar is chosen for its melting properties and strong flavor, which pairs well with the smoky bacon. The filled skins are then returned to the oven until the cheese melts into a bubbly, golden pool. The dish's widespread popularity helped elevate the status of the potato from a simple side dish to a featured player in the culinary world. Fish sticks became part of the school lunch menu shortly after their commercial introduction in the 1950s. Made from white fish like cod or pollock, these sticks are cut into manageable pieces, breaded and then deep-fried or baked to create a crispy exterior with a tender and flaky interior. This preparation method not only makes fish sticks easy to eat, but also appealing to the palates of young students who may otherwise be reluctant to consume fish. The breading, often seasoned with spices and herbs, adds a savory flavor that complements the mild taste of the fish, making it a popular choice in school cafeterias. Fish sticks are typically served with tartar sauce or ketchup and a side of vegetables, providing a balanced meal with proteins, carbs, and vitamins. Their ease of preparation, including the ability to cook them from frozen, aligns well with the needs of large-scale meal production typical in schools. Speedies are also something you would find at gatherings for family or just friends, mostly because no party is complete without a good platter of meat skewers going around a few drinks. So, mostly people would enjoy these most when the meat was lamb, but some areas like California would use chicken or beef too. It was really the grilling where the magic happened. These plates of Speedies set the mood in a party alight. It was a taste that, when they experienced it, people at a party knew that they were in for a really good time. The kind of dish that gets a crowd excited and hungry. There were even Speedafests in Binghamton and all around New York in general. It was a part of the local culture that no big celebration was really complete without. The reason it got popular wasn't just because of a regional preference in New York, though. The dish was bold, tangy, and citrusy, and it could double as an amazing sandwich too. You would find these in street stalls throughout New York, as well as at homes, but nowadays the dish has faded away into irrelevance. Lentil soups were even more common in the medieval world. They would change a lot depending on the region, though. For example, in Europe's southern regions like Provence and Spain, lentils were not only used to feed humans, but also to feed animals. Lentil pottages were one of the most important meals for the church as well, because when the fast would break, this was one of the few meals that could feed an entire group and still be very easy to prepare. Lentils would provide an incredible dose of protein, and it would need just water and a few other vegetables if you could spare them. Onions, leeks, and garlic, or just some savory or sage would work really well. In the Middle East and North Africa, lentil soups were something else entirely. Medieval Arab cookbooks like Anwa al-Saidala F. Alwan al-Atima would feature all kinds of lentil recipes with an incredible amount of flavorings, seasonings, and spices to make it stand out from other dishes. It would be a lot more bombastic and flavorful than European versions of the same dish, and if looking at today's world is any example, I think it's historically accurate to say that they've always had us beat when it comes to working with legumes. Spam and pineapple sandwiches capture a uniquely American taste for sweet and savory combinations that soared in popularity during World War II. Introduced to the American military in 1937, Spam became a staple in many households. The recipe for Spam and pineapple sandwiches represents the culinary influence of Hawaii on the mainland, which intensified after Hawaii became a state in 1959. The sandwich features crispy slices of fried Spam paired with sweet, slightly charred pineapple rings. nestled between slices of toasted bread. This blend of salty meat with the caramelized sweetness of pineapple provides a delightful contrast in flavors. Optionally dressed with mayonnaise or a slice of cheese, these sandwiches reflect a significant Hawaiian influence on mainland American cuisine, particularly during the 1950s when Hawaiian culture gained widespread appeal. The result is a dish that marries diverse culinary traditions in a uniquely satisfying way. Combining two iconic American fast foods, the cheeseburger and French fries, into one dish, the cheeseburger French fry casserole emerged as a popular meal option in the late 1980s. This casserole layers seasoned ground beef mixed with ketchup, mustard, and chopped onions, topped with a layer of French fries, sprinkled with shredded cheese, and baked until golden and bubbly. Introduced in the kitchens of inventive home cooks during the 1990s, this casserole was a response to a growing interest in recreating fast food favorites at home, offering a fun and fuss-free dinner option that delighted both kids and adults alike. Sloppy Joes have been a staple in American school cafeterias since their introduction in the mid-20th century. This dish features ground beef or pork that is sautéed with onions and garlic until browned, then simmered in a savory tomato-based sauce seasoned with Worcestershire sauce and other spices. The thick, hearty mixture is then spooned onto soft hamburger buns, creating a filling and flavorful sandwich that is both messy and delightful to eat. The preparation requires minimal kitchen equipment and ingredients that are staples in most school pantries, making it a cost-effective choice for feeding a large number of students. Moreover, the ability to prepare the meat mixture ahead of time and quickly assemble the sandwiches during busy lunch periods enhances its practicality. The familiarity of the flavors, combined with the satisfying nature of the sandwich, ensures that Sloppy Joes remain a cherished option within school meal programs. Potatoes weren't the only option. They were great, but not the only ones. On days when people would naturally get too tired of eating potatoes, they would always go for things like baked bean sandwiches. This was a filling, no-fuss meal that was especially loved by working-class homes that were doing labor-intensive work. They were very common in the Northeast, the Midwest, and different parts of the South, especially where any kind of construction was going on. It was also really helpful that so many brands had come out with such accessible and easy canned beans. These were cheap, required no effort to cook, and the result was something you could use in a soup, a sandwich, or a casserole. It just depended on what you were feeling that day. Either way, you were going to get a delicious meal. One of the biggest reasons I think this was as popular as it was is because people really began to rely on it during the Great Depression. Another good reason is that this was the perfect lunch for your kids, and it was so low effort that making it wasn't a hassle at all. Barley bread is one of the oldest kinds of loaded breads that you can find in European history. It's completely medieval and has a history that goes back thousands of years. This is because among all the grains in the world, barley is arguably one of the first that we ever domesticated. It was first cultivated in the Fertile Crescent, which, if you don't know where that is, it's the area that covers modern-day Turkey, Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon, and Palestine. Barley bread was one of the most common kinds of bread in the early Middle Ages, and it went onwards towards the High Middle Ages as well. This was typically considered to be a peasant bread, though. It had a coarse texture, it was darker than other breads, and it did not really have enough gluten. It was hard bread because of that fact. It was actually a bit of a sign of your economic class if you were constantly having barley bread, because only the rich people would get to eat fluffy white loaves of bread like we're used to. Canned salmon patties were also known as salmon croquettes, and they had a few different reasons for being as beloved as they were. So, first of all, everyone just loves salmon. It's a fact of life, but salmon is one of the most popular kinds of fish to ever grace the waters and tables of the United States. Now, canned salmon takes that up a notch by being incredibly affordable, having a very long shelf, and not needing any refrigeration. Besides just being one of the most easy-to-use ingredients across the board and having a justified place in almost every kind of recipe that we see today, salmon patties did eventually go out of relevancy. I think people just moved on from the idea of having salmon in the shape of a patty instead of some saucy dish that really capitalizes on that. I like the intrigue of a good fish sandwich myself, but there's just more fun to be had. Luckily, people would use the patties in different ways at least. While some people would just eat the straight up, others would make rice bowls out of them or sandwiches and burgers. It was actually a pretty decent idea for how low effort it was. Peanut butter and bacon sandwiches represent a bold fusion of flavors, combining the smooth, slightly sweet taste of peanut butter with the crispy, savory bite of bacon. This combination was part of a broader mid-century trend of experimenting with sweet and savory pairings, which included other famous concoctions like chicken and waffles. Popular in mid-20th century America, this sandwich typically involves a generous spread of peanut butter on toasted bread, topped with strips of crunchy bacon. The king of rock and roll, Elvis Presley, was known to enjoy this sandwich with added slices of banana, introducing a sweet layer to the salty-sweet mix. This quirky combination was emblematic of a period when Americans were open to experimenting with diverse and unexpected flavor pairings, creating memorable and satisfying meals. Onion tarts were naturally one of the go-to meals for people, given how important onions themselves were in times like these. But one has to ask, what really is an onion tart? A typical medieval tart would basically start with a coarse flour crust. This would be made from the typical rye, barley, and maslin mixes we've seen so far, and that's how the pastry was made. This would be a vessel for the filling, which would be made out of parboiled onions and butter. These softened onions would be mixed with herbs and then enriched more with eggs or fresh cheese, whichever was available, or both, if you were doing well. This mixture would then go into the shell of the tart, and it would then be baked until you would get a lightly brown surface. In Southern Europe and the regions that are now France and Germany, this dish was the predecessor of dishes like onion pies in modern times. This was a pretty herbal-tasting dish that carried the flavor of onions over almost perfectly, and it was something people would rely on when they wanted an open-faced, savory treat. Navy bean loaves are pretty much exactly what you think they are. Want the comfort of a baked loaf along with all the benefits and muscle building of 3 different kinds of beans? You've found the right recipe. This loaf was a budget-friendly, meatless meal that became popular among the working class and people who were trying to cut down on how much meat they were eating. Growing health concerns really made people turn to dishes like this more and more often because they were realizing that they couldn't afford, financially, physically, or mentally, several health scares per year just because of higher cholesterol or something. Bean loaves were something that were synonymous with being a clean, healthy dish. They were also very filling, and they would go around a family of 4 pretty easily. Beans were a great source of fiber, not just protein, so they also made you full for longer. You could literally just mash and blend them into a thick paste. You could also leave a few chunks in there for a better bite, and then you would just need breadcrumbs and crackers to bind everything together. Pour in some eggs for a better shape, and throw it in the oven. Popularized in American households in the early 1900s, so-tender Swiss steak involves a method of preparing a tougher cut of beef, such as round steak, by pounding or rolling before cooking. This tenderizing process, known as Swissing, lends the dish its name, although it has no connection to Switzerland. Traditionally, the steak is browned, then slow-cooked in a rich tomato and onion gravy, allowing the flavors to meld and the meat to become fork-tender. This dish showcased an economical approach to cooking during the Great Depression, providing a delicious solution for less desirable cuts of meat. The preparation of Swiss steak often became a Sunday dinner ritual, where its slow cooking could proceed alongside family activities, making it an integral part of the family dining experience. Baked turnips with herbs is an example of how even a simple and humble root vegetable can be turned into something that gets your kids at the table if you know what you're doing. Luckily, medieval-era cooks had a lot of room for trial and error, and they definitely learned a few things about working with turnips. While baking them was never as common as stewing or boiling them, it was extremely good. Households that had the privilege of a bake oven would abuse that luxury maliciously, in fact. That's just how nice it was. In households where that wasn't a thing, Tay turnips were typically wrapped in kale or cabbage leaves and then baked in ashes or at the edges of a hearth. This was a pretty rustic method, but it would help to soften the turnip, and it let the herbs introduce some much-needed flavor. Of course, you had to be very careful that what you were doing wasn't going to burn the turnips. Monasteries were most commonly known for preparing turnips, and they relied pretty much entirely on olive oil and butter. This resulting dish was something that was really earthy and savory, but the herbs helped when it came to the taste of turnips. For some, that taste can be really overwhelming. Cabbage and bacon fry-up was something people adored for its simplicity and its affordability. It was a hearty meal you would frequently see on dinner tables throughout the 1960s if you weren't already tired of seeing it everywhere in cookbooks. It was very common to see this in Appalachia and the South, because cabbage was especially cheap there. Bacon was something the entire nation had a deep-found appreciation for, but the South was always one step ahead in all things savory. The dish was supposed to be a main course meal with a side. This would usually be cornbread or potatoes, but if you were working with lower quantities, then this dish could also do great as a side dish. Cabbage was one of the most affordable vegetables on the entire market, and it was not seasonal. Back then, refrigeration had not become a countrywide phenomena that everyone could rely on 24/7 like we do. We have our fridges on all the time, you know? And cabbage was one of those kinds of vegetables that could last for weeks and weeks without any kind of refrigeration. It was really quick and easy, it was flexible, and you could even try all kinds of different spices and toppings like ranch dressing to make it even better. Salisbury steak was incorporated into school menus in the 1960s, providing a hearty and appealing option. Named after Dr. James H. Salisbury, who advocated a meat-centric diet, it features ground beef mixed with eggs, breadcrumbs, and spices, shaped into patties and simmered in gravy. This method of preparation allows for bulk cooking, ideal for school settings where efficiency and volume are necessary. Salisbury steak offers significant nutritional value with its high protein content, making it a satisfying meal that supports the physical needs of growing students. The gravy not only adds flavor, but also keeps the patties moist and appealing throughout the serving period. Its rich flavor and tender texture have made it a favorite among students, ensuring it remains a popular choice in school cafeterias. Rabbit stew is pretty self-explanatory. It's, well, rabbit stew, you know? I'm just kidding. It was a lot different from the stews we might be used to seeing today or even 50 to 60 years ago. Hunting wild game such as rabbits was how people lived off of the land, and making these stews would ensure enough food to last the day and give everyone 2 or 3 square meals. What people would do is add as many herbs, aromatics, and vegetables as they could. They took a very different approach to cooking. Some of these spices, like cumin or black pepper powder, may not necessarily have gone the best with rabbit stew. They were still added for any perceived medicinal benefits, though, like digestion and gut health. Back then, people were so used to eating whatever was available or whatever would keep them full longer. If it would taste good, that would be even better, but something tasting good was never a priority. Hunting rabbits was something everyone, from kids to adults, would be involved in, and villages and communities would set out traps for miles to capture as much game as they could. You hear the name rumaki and you might start thinking about some pretty exotic dishes, but it's actually more of a humble appetizer that picks a few flavors and does them really, really well. It was also made at Trader Vic's, a Polynesian-style restaurant right here in Uncle Sam's USA, which I'm sure you didn't see coming either. I wouldn't blame you for thinking it's exotic, since at tiki parties it was definitely considered that, and when tiki culture as a whole started erupting into the mainstream of American eating, it was still sought after, with just as much interest. The dish itself also makes use of some things that aren't familiar, and some that are, like chicken livers, water chestnuts, and bacon. It was a really good hors d'oeuvre that boomed in popularity after the World War II era, though you'd be pretty stumped if you tried to go out and look for it today. Still, it's kind of sad we can't go out to parties and experience chestnuts and crispy bacon anymore, wouldn't you agree? Or is tiki cooking not really up your alley? So we're not done with the toasts just yet. Pork and beans on buttered toast was arguably the lifeblood of 1960s frugal eating. It was a simple and cheap meal that was very popular even from the 1940s, and while baked beans on toast was something that people always associated with New England and immigrant cuisine, baked beans on toast actually became something that Americans took very fondly to. It was thanks to the act of mixing canned pork and beans in there, and these beans would already be seasoned and sweetened. Thank you, Campbell's. This dish was something you would see in mining communities really often. You would also see them in mill towns. You didn't need any sort of prep work for this dish whatsoever. All you had to do was just pop open the can and heat it up. You could make a sandwich out of it too, or you could have it as a side to some stew and dip it in. People ate very different and interesting things back then, not just to keep everything according to budget, but also so that things would just taste better, be healthier, you know? People really used to treat their food like fuel back in the day. Rye pancakes are a fantastic option to go for if you have a family of 4 and live in prehistoric times. They were one of the most common recipes, despite what you might be thinking. These people were still walking around wearing chainmail armor and robes, so how'd they end up having pancakes? Well, they're actually pretty different from the kinds of pancakes we're used to today. These are just rye flour, water, some salt, and that's it. It makes a batter that can be ladled, but most people would typically just pour it onto a griddle or a hot stone suspended over a hearth. This was the most common way to cook desserts or breakfast in these times. If you were lucky enough to have milk or buttermilk, you could replace the water with that, and it would usually make them a bit more tender. People typically fried these in butter or animal fat. Well, if it wasn't a fasting day. Rye usually does not need to be flavored much, but what flavorings people did use, they were very different from what we have today. People used stewed vegetables, onions and garlic instead of Miracle Whip, rainbow sprinkles and maple syrup. Take a bite into the past with bologna boats, a fun and inventive lunchtime creation from mid-20th century America. These unique creations start with slices of bologna, heated and shaped into whimsical boat-like forms, then filled with a hearty helping of creamy mashed potatoes, gooey melted cheese, or savory baked beans. School cafeterias were particularly fond of serving these as a fun, kid-friendly option. The versatility of bologna boats is notable, with some versions including macaroni and cheese or even chili for those seeking something more substantial. They emerged as a clever way to utilize common pantry staples creatively, providing a budget-friendly meal solution during times when stretching the grocery budget was necessary. Green tomato pie is something that'll have you running back for seconds. First off, you gotta hand it to whoever made this dish for their ingenuity. It's not every day you get a banger of a dish that actually is centered around making the green tomato shine out of everything else, but Southern home cooking will do that for you. Charlotte's green tomato pie in particular makes use of some typical Southern spices like cinnamon and nutmeg and unripened green tomatoes, and has you making a pie that'll rival even the best apple ones you could find at bakeries. Green tomatoes have an especially great harvest during the fall, so that's when this dish would see the most mileage. You would find houses all over the South constantly making green tomato pies, and this specific pie is an example of how you don't need anything fancy to create something that can get everyone at the table. You know what's even funnier? This dish is one of the best things to come out of mock cooking because it was made to imitate mock apple pie and mincemeat pies. An imitation of an imitation ends up giving us something that was a big part of Southern culture. Who would have thought? Green tomato pie is something that'll have you running back for seconds. First off, you gotta hand it to whoever made this dish for their ingenuity. It's not every day you get a banger of a dish that actually is centered around making the green tomato shine out of everything else, but Southern home cooking will do that for you. Charlotte's green tomato pie in particular makes use of some typical Southern spices like cinnamon and nutmeg and unripened green tomatoes, and has you making a pie that'll rival even the best apple ones you could find at bakeries. Green tomatoes have an especially great harvest during the fall, so that's when this dish would see the most mileage. You would find houses all over the South constantly making green tomato pies, and this specific pie is an example of how you don't need anything fancy to create something that can get everyone at the table. You know what's even funnier? This dish is one of the best things to come out of mock cooking because it was made to imitate mock apple pie and mincemeat pies. An imitation of an imitation ends up giving us something that was a big part of Southern culture. Who would have thought? We're really starting to explore the deep end of medieval countryside cuisine now, so I hope you're still tuned. Our next item happens to be turnip stew, which is a textbook example of how people got their nutrition in those times. Potatoes were not actually the most widespread ingredient like they are today. It used to be turnips. This was especially true for Europe, where potatoes arrived by the 16th century. Turnips were favored because they could be preserved very easily in root cellars for winter. They were really easy to grow in poor soils, and they were hardy. Also, this was one of the few crops where even its root was edible. It wasn't a dish that had a lot of guidelines to follow, so in that respect it was a lot similar to how pottage worked. People would throw in whatever herbs, roots, aromatics, and scraps of meat and protein they had. One of the best things that would go along with turnip stew if it was available was beetroot and eggplant, which might be a surprise combination for you to hear, but was actually fairly common back then. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe and let us know your favorite potluck recipe in the comments below.